October 1962. The world teeters on the edge of nuclear disaster. Two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, face off in a high-stakes confrontation that could end life as we know it. This is the story of the Cuban Missile Crisis. To understand the Cuban Missile Crisis requires looking back at the Cold War, a period of intense political, military, and ideological rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. It lasted from the end of World War II in 1945 until the Soviet Union's collapse in 1991. During the Cold War, both superpowers believed their survival depended on achieving nuclear dominance. Hence, both superpowers became locked in a perilous nuclear arms race, each aiming to gain a strategic advantage by building stronger, more destructive weapons and developing faster, covert delivery systems and placing nuclear missiles closer to their enemy's homeland. This dangerous competition brought the world to the brink of nuclear war and the end of the world. The crisis began when the United States had placed nuclear missiles in Turkey, directly threatening the Soviet Union. In response, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev looked for a way to counter this threat. His plan? Secretly deploy Soviet nuclear missiles just 90 miles from the United States coast, in Cuba. Cuba, a small island nation in the Caribbean, had just undergone a revolution. In 1959, Fidel Castro and his followers overthrew the United States-backed dictator Batista, bringing communism to the Western Hemisphere. After the failed Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961, an attempt by the United States to overthrow Castro, Cuba feared another American attack. Castro turned to the Soviet Union for protection, and Khrushchev saw an opportunity to place nuclear missiles on Cuban soil. On October 14, 1962, a United States U-2 spy plane flew over Cuba and took photographs that shocked the world. The images revealed Soviet nuclear missiles being assembled in Cuba, capable of reaching major United States cities in minutes. President John F. Kennedy was immediately briefed, and a crisis began. On October 22, Kennedy addressed the nation. He announced a naval blockade, or quarantine, of Cuba to prevent any more Soviet missiles from arriving. The message was clear. The United States would not tolerate nuclear weapons in its backyard. Yet, the Soviets had sent ships carrying additional missiles to Cuba. As the ships approached the blockade, the world held its breath. During the crisis, the United States raised its DEFCON level, Defense Readiness Condition, to DEFCON 2, the highest alert ever reached in history. This level meant that the United States Armed Forces were just one step away from nuclear war, indicating a state of maximum military readiness, short of direct conflict. Would the Soviets cross the line, risking a direct confrontation with the U.S. Navy and sparking a nuclear war? At the last moment, the Soviet ships turned back. Behind the scenes, intense negotiations were taking place. Attorney General Robert Kennedy secretly met with Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin. A deal was struck. The Soviet Union would remove its missiles from Cuba if the United States promised not to invade Cuba. Additionally, the U.S. agreed to quietly remove its missiles from Turkey. On October 28, 1962, Khrushchev announced the withdrawal of Soviet missiles from Cuba. The world breathed a sigh of relief. Nuclear war had been averted. The Cuban Missile Crisis had a lasting impact and changed the course of history. First, it highlighted the dangers of nuclear conflict and the need for better communication between superpowers. A hotline was established between Washington, D.C. and Moscow to allow direct communication in the event of future crises. Secondly, The Cuban Missile Crisis led to a renewed push for arms control agreements, such as the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty of 1963, which banned above-ground nuclear tests. Thirdly, the event pushed Cuba even closer to the Soviet Union for decades. The crisis also solidified Fidel Castro's power and Cuba's adversarial stance against the US, leading to decades of embargoes and strained relations. Today, the Cuban Missile Crisis remains an important lesson on the dangers of brinkmanship, the power of negotiation, and the devastating risks of nuclear conflict.